apply most directly to them. Thus, programs like Hardy Girls, Healthy Women complement more recent urban developments like Hollaback, which some of you might have heard of, a New York City-based movement of girls with an international mission to end street harassment, and FIRE, Filipinas for Rights and Empowerment, seeking to find a place for empowered women with hip-hop by critiquing and changing misogynistic hip-hop culture. The presence and visibility of racially and culturally diverse groups of activists brings to light that which is at the heart of Spark's protest, that the category of girl does not and cannot be constituted by a white, middle-class, sexualized object. The implicit whiteness and subsequent erasure of a racially defined experience of girlhood are thus a significant part of the conversation at the summit and within the movement itself. Awareness and action were further supported by having the entire Spark event, including speakers, workshops, discussions, accessible online. The opportunity for anyone to attend the summit virtually is an appropriate response to the changing role of communication technology in moderating social behavior. In other words, the importance we place on technology in mediating and maintaining social relationships should be incorporated in a contemporary movement's networking strategies to attract members and maintain momentum. This follows the simple axiom of using relevant media to reach out to people in order to maximize effects. Much of the social change that must occur in order to secure empowerment requires radical cultural shifts in thinking, which most likely operate outside the domain of the United States legal system as it exists today. For example, treating children as developing socially constituted citizens rather than individuals propelled by private desires shaped by market forces requires an ideological shift away from a capitalist-driven, consumer-oriented conception of human nature. Such a discursive shift cannot be configured into the language of policy, as it not only contradicts liberal political theory, but might be seen to violate First Amendment rights of media makers themselves. Spark's policymaking initiative, in the form of the Healthy Media for Youth Act, put forth by the APA and the Girl Scouts of America, played only a small role within the summit. Perhaps past examples of social movements provided a cautionary tale, whose goals of legal change led to demobilization and a reaffirmation of a hegemonic discourse. Feminist movements have faced battles in regards to privacy issues and legal change. Because of the subjective nature of cultural oppression, girls cannot access justice through a legal framework in the same manner as women experiencing, for instance, domestic violence. The legislative support for a social movement centered around the empowerment of girls is therefore secondary to the social support and the mobilization it must first achieve. Following the theoretical footsteps of the new social movements, the role of a girl-based movement is to challenge dominant values and the forces that have threatened, destroyed, or manipulated their self-identity. The new identities arising from such action are inherently more significant than their legal change. Self-determination and identity expression lie at the core of the Spark Summit workshops and inscribed in the missions of many of the collaborating organizations. Meaningful reform of the cultural forces that shape and constitute media requires the multidisciplinary approach of a movement highly sensitive to the changing relationships between technology and identity formation. The landscape of 21st century social activism is dotted with the pitfalls of liberal individualism and its presupposition of the self as an independent, autonomous being, denying difference and relational context at structural levels. At the same time, contemporary criticism of liberalism often too quickly embraces community as a political ideal. New forms of technology have the potential to embrace both community and individualism. The internet can serve to isolate the individual from physical contact, as well as provide membership into virtual communities that would otherwise be inaccessible. It is fitting to me that the most media-savvy and technologically involved members of society today are utilizing a medium so widespread and thus democratic to launch a movement of protest criticizing media itself. The success of this movement lies not with corporate or legal decision-making, but rather with youth's use of the dense sociability of the internet to exercise a pluralist understanding of girlhood. It is the youth who have and continue to urge their peers to speak, and thus identify themselves, and it is the responsibility of us all to be held accountable for cultural sources of their silence.
Our last speaker, thank you very much, Marika. Our last speaker is is Raymond Hicks. He's a senior and he's a bio major, so you don't have to be in the social sciences to be able to do a really great paper to be accepted into the colloquium. He did this paper for English 100, and it's a really, really interesting paper. His paper discusses the social benefits for youth and societal pitfalls of youth gangs, while proposing alternative modes of organization that benefit youth and society. Please help me welcome Raymond.
All right. So normally when you hear the word gang, it comes with a negative baggage. I asked, several of my teachers and other people, like other peers, and asked them, when I say word gang, what do they mean? Or okay, what kind of thoughts come to mind, positive or negative? And most of them say that a negative thought comes to mind, and only a few said that when they think about it in a positive sense, it's more along the lines of like if you're gonna have a get together, it's like, oh, come on, bring a gang along, and not so much in the sense, like I guess the criminal activity of it all. So in my paper, I highlighted a little bit about the gang experience, as in what forms them, and then how they're formed, and then from there moving forward and creating a new, I guess shedding the baggage that comes with the word, and offering new ideas, and then discuss the divergent perceptions of having gangs in the community, and implementing innovative tactics to stop its bleeding growth. There's four main interventional methods used, and I'll touch on them later. So my thesis was, the word gang has predominantly had a negative connotation associated with it, but a gang can also have a positive identification if the connections made to them are changed. However, those negative changes of gangs will likely continue because of several major factors that impact them. Those factors consist of structural and psychological factors. And if we can slowly remove those negative stigmas and replace them with positive alternatives, we can create better community for all to enjoy. So first, why do they form? So we have, like I said, we have structural factors and we have psychological factors. And with structural factors, we have minorities, and they're usually young, and the males, and these three things are usually the core foundation of what a gang might entail. However, it's not always a minority issue. Sometimes it could be a mix of different races all together in a gang, but those are usually less common. And then they're not always young, though they do make up a large population in different sizes of cities, large, small, or rural, or urban areas. They're not always young. Sometimes they're, I guess anyone that you would consider an adult, 18 and over. And this, however, is males that make up gangs it's more overwhelming than women. And yeah, so usually in this situation, we also have psychological factors, and so these four concepts make up psychological factors. And so with status needs, it's a need for an individual will feel the need for a social recognition, a feeling of a we-ness, like we as a group, and often these times, these individuals will have, in terms of youth, they will have problems at home with their families, and their schools, may not be up to par. So, sometimes a broken home, so they might suffer from abuse or, and then a mistreatment from their parents. And so with that, if it's a single father or single mother raising a child, then they sometimes try to find a way to fill that void, and by doing so, they gain recognition and a sense of self by by joining a gang. And then, so that kind of ties into identity and belonging needs. And so there's a quote from this website about gangs where it says, it is not difficult to imagine how far an impoverished, fatherless, abused boy becoming a Manitoba warrior might provide a welcome and potential definition of who he is. And also with that, you have, with these two social disabilities, you might have a youth that has poor conversational skills with either with their peers or also with adults that they talk to, and because of that, they feel like they're inadequate and they don't have an opportunity to strive for, you know, I guess a better outcome, you know, of what I guess America has to offer. And so with that and psychological characteristics, when that happens, when that feeling of rejection happens, the reason why they form gangs is that each of them collectively have all felt that rejection, so they kind of form an institution of rejection. And furthermore, with physical or psychological characteristics, you'll have them in a situation where you'll have basically two types of gang members. So you have a core member and then you'll have a fringe member. So a core member will usually someone that is you know, makes up the general, you know, they've probably been a member for a long time, or they're generally the leader, and they usually will recruit you know, a youth that might be troubled, some people that you would consider, if you're in high school, someone you might consider psychopathic, you know, a little bit off or something like that. And so that's the general recruiting. And then you have fringe core members who are just on the outside, and they're like part of the member, or they're part of the gang, but they're not, you know, they're not really core members. They're not someone who you know, is often seen as dangerous, and often these are usually the short tenured guys, and they can, you know, leave and come and go as they please, usually without penalty. It's usually the guys who've been in the gang the longest that will suffer penalty, as in, like when you join, sometimes you'll get beat, and sometimes to leave a gang, you also get beat, you know, as an initiation in or out. Okay, so gang demographics. U.S. cities that are deemed as medium to large size cities contain approximately 94% of the nation's gang activity. So staggeringly enough, a single city could have up to and exceed 40 gangs in which they could all be a different ensign. So it's typically, right, the next slide. Typically there'll be in larger cities, right here I have a breakdown. So larger cities, suburban, smaller and rural, you have the Hispanics and Latinos, well, first, if you take a look at all the larger cities, it's a little bit shifted, okay, but each number corresponds. So you can see that most of the numbers in each group, except for blacks and whites, they're actually more in rural counties, which doesn't follow the normal trend of it being in larger cities. That I found a little interesting, and I'll tell you why in the next slide. Oh yeah, so age, we have 18 and over,